man, oh man, I don't know how many of you suffered through that from Donald Trump. You know, the first thing that struck me is, I mean, this guy's lawless, uh, total violation of the Hatch Act, sitting there on the south lawn of the White House, supposedly the people's house. They even called it that, but it was like one of these patrimonial dictatorships you see around the world. And of course, his daughter introduced him, his son spoke, his wife spoke, his in-laws spoke, even the girlfriend of one of his in-laws, or I guess his son spoke, like royalty. And then you look out in the crowd, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, and very few people had masks. And almost all of them were white people in a country that's multiracial, multicultural. So that said a lot right there. Second thing that struck me, he doubled down on the social conservatism that has characterized the Republican Party, the racism, the misogyny, the anti-abortion, the anti-immigrant, xenophobia. And then he did this phony economic populism, pandering and claiming all kinds of things that are lies about, you know, working people and how much he's going to help them and how much he loves them. And, you know, I kept thinking about that Lordstown factory about 15 miles from Youngstown, Ohio. One time had 12,000 auto workers working there. And it was having trouble, and he went there and promised that it would stay open and expand, and it closed last year. Nobody works there now. And then he goes around talking about how he brought jobs back. And we're in the middle of this coronavirus depression, tens of millions unemployed, tens of millions facing eviction. Over 10 million people lost their health insurance because it was tied to their employment. And then he goes around lying that the Republicans are going to preserve the pre-existing condition provision of the Affordable Care Act while they're at the Supreme Court trying to get that struck down. And then he lied like he did last time about how he'd always protect Medicare and Social Security. But we know he said in private, in fact, I think it was Forbes, that after he gets elected, they're going to look to cut the so-called entitlements. So this guy, that's really the third thing that struck me, is the lies. You know he's lying when his lips are moving. And he's talking about the workers, and we've had growing inequality and poverty during his administration. You know, he lied about the pandemic. He's following the scientific advice. You know, my ass, the public health officials and the epidemiologists, doctors are pulling their hair out. You know, crowds sitting there with no masks on. That was against all the guidelines. And he's talking about following scientific advice. He said he was ending the endless wars. No, he's escalated the drone wars. We got a bigger troop footprint in the Middle East. He said he brought peace to the Middle East. And what are all these wars? Man, this guy just, he lies and lies and lies. So the fifth thing, I'm not sure I'm getting my numbers right, is that, well, no, let me talk about the racism, because he doubled down on that. And he started with the immigrants like he always does. And, you know, he makes it sound like they're invading the country and causing all these problems. No mention of the children that have been separated from their parents, so the people camped out on the Mexican side of the border, not able to exercise their legal right to ask for asylum or the right to immigrate and go through that process. So that's where he started. Then, you know, the dog whistle, the Democrats are going to abolish the suburbs, which is crazy, because then he said they were all living in gated communities and sending their kids to private schools. You don't have to be consistent to be a liar. And, you know, a lot of people, they go with who they trust or their team, and it's not rational, which, you know, is one of the issues in politics. And then he doubled down on law and order and law enforcement. He had the damn Border Patrol, who, you remember that Facebook page where half of them were on it, 10,000 Border Patrol officers. That page, you know, had terrible racist and misogynistic rhetoric and comments on it. And they became the people that volunteered to go to Portland to repress those demonstrators. He's talking about freedom, but he's the one that ordered legal demonstrators in front of the White House dispersed by tear gas so he could hoist the Bible in front of a church without even telling that church that he's going to do it. They were mad at him. This is his idea of freedom. And then he never mentioned George Floyd or Jacob Blake. And that's incredible, given what we've seen on TV. But you know what that really is? It's a message to these white racist vigilantes, the terrorists, the real terrorist threat to our country or to people in our country. So that whole thing was a signal to those people, you have a green light. And he didn't talk about it tonight. He hinted at it, how the election's being rigged by the Democrats, you know, mail-in ballot and all that stuff, when the Republicans are trying to suppress the vote in many ways by purging the voter rolls, not putting enough polling places in minority communities and in student communities around universities. So you get in long lines, you don't have time to vote, discourages voting. I mean, they're playing all those games. You know, we had the situation in 2016 where over 70,000 votes in Michigan, most of them out of Detroit, weren't counted. And that was because the Republican Secretary of State in Michigan sent bad scanners into those precincts in Detroit. So a lot of votes couldn't go through the machine because it was broken. And then, you know, gradually they got them fixed and made accommodations. But in the end, 70,000 ballots weren't counted. So the election was over, and it was Jill Stein and the Green Party went in there and said, we want those ballots counted. And the Republican Secretary of State went to the court and said, well, because there were more ballots than went through the scanning machine, they should not be counted. Something fishy was going on. It's exactly why the ballots they had should have been counted. And the judge asked, and the Greens were arguing they should be counted because of that discrepancy. They haven't been counted yet. And the judge asked the Clinton lawyers who were present if they had an opinion, and they said, oh, we're just observing. They didn't even speak up for counting those ballots. That was 70,000 ballots from Detroit. That probably would have covered the 10,000 vote difference between Clinton and Trump in Michigan. And the Democrats, instead of fighting the Republicans, blamed the Green Party. And that's the problem. The Democrats accommodate people like Donald Trump. Bill Clinton called it triangulation. And you talk about the racism, recall that when Clinton laid out his law and order program in 1992, he went to Stone Mountain, Georgia, the Mount Rushmore for the Ku Klux Klan, their spiritual home, with Jefferson Davis and Nathan Bedford Forrest carved into Stone Mountain. And he had a bunch of prisoners, most of them black, behind him, when he laid out his program, that Joe Biden was the legislative architect when it went through the Senate Judiciary Committee during Clinton's administration. I mean, that was a symbol as well, like Trump had there today. And the Democrats want to tell us, you can't run, you got to vote for Biden to fight Trump. But you know, when you get down to what really goes on behind the rhetoric, in a lot of respects, they're on the same team. Just Trump is such a dummy. I mean, he's a childlike dummy. He has make-believe. He makes stuff up all the time, like the coronavirus is going to disappear. So even the people that run this country, the money, the big money, a lot of them are behind Biden because Trump is just obviously incompetent. So, you know, some of my observations. And of course, Trump is confused as usual. He's calling Biden a Trojan horse for socialism, and Bernie Sanders is his buddy. You know, Bernie's compromised a lot. He now says he'll settle for Medicare for all over 55 and for children, but in between we'll go with, you know, private health insurance with the Affordable Care Act, maybe a public option, which, you know, costs more than Medicare for all would. So, you know, even the progressives in the Democratic Party, they don't change it, it changes them. And that's a real shame. So, you know, Biden's not the socialist in this race. Me and Angela Walker are the socialists in this race. And of course, I would love to debate Donald Trump on socialism, where somebody could answer that kind of rhetoric he's putting out there. Joe Biden certainly can't, because he's not a socialist. He's, you know, when it comes to economics, pretty much in the same camp as Trump. They believe we're going to get out of this deep depression we're in solely by private enterprise. Whereas, you know, we have a socialist program, the Green New Deal, to do a lot of public investment to rebuild manufacturing that was talked about tonight, as well as our energy and transportation systems. Unfortunately, we're not going to probably get that opportunity. So I don't know. I'll wrap this up. I think I don't want to fact check Trump, because that would take as long as his damn speech. But I think the question for progressives, and I know probably most of you watching this are already going to vote the green ticket, but people are going to try to shame you, and there are going to be debates saying, "Oh, you got to vote Biden because we got to get Trump out there." But you know, vote the Greens. Trump's column, it's in an anti-Trump column, and it's a stronger anti-Trump vote. And if you're a progressive or a socialist and you vote for Joe Biden, shame on you, because you just voted against Medicare for all. You just voted against a real full-strength Green New Deal, and you just voted against the kind of peace initiatives we're talking about to end these endless wars and get us out of this insane arms race that the bullets and the atomic scientists has motivated them to make their doomsday clock the closest they've ever been to midnight, and none of the presidential candidates and none of the leadership of these two capitalist parties, the Democrats and Republicans, are talking about. So if we're going to come out of this election with the left, we got to vote green. We got to get ballot lines where we can in the states. So when, you know, the polls show Biden's probably going to win. And I was talking with some people in Massachusetts earlier, and one of them was saying, "Oh, I got to vote for Biden." And I said, "You're over 30 points ahead in Massachusetts. You know, he's over 30 points ahead. The question is, how are you going to vote against Trump in Massachusetts?" Same thing in New York, 25 points. It's over 30 points in California. But in the so-called battleground states, you know, we like to say, for the Green Party, every state's a battleground. Trump was talking about Pennsylvania and Ohio and how Biden's against fracking. That's a lie. He's for fracking. How he wants to end fossil fuels. No, he wants carbon capture and sequestration. You know, but we know Trump lies. The fact is, the Democrats in those two states, Ohio and Pennsylvania, when you talk about fracking, they go hide. They're not opposed to it. Only the Green Party is. And as Kali Akuno, many of you know him, an activist in Jackson, Mississippi, we were talking about this a while back, and he said, you know, the Democrats want us to make those states sacrifice zones for their interests. But for the Greens in those states that want to fight fracking, or Greens anywhere, want to fight for affordable housing when the Democratic machines in these cities are run by the real estate industry, it doesn't want to do affordable housing unless the public pays for it. Otherwise, they're interested in the scale market. So if you're fighting for affordable housing, you're fighting the Democrats as well as the Republicans. That's why we got to vote green. So if Biden is in office, he's going to disappoint progressives, and then we'll be more open to an alternative. This anybody but Trump situation. Make it a difficult year, but we need to keep fighting, do the best we can, and engage these progressives and socialists that think they got to vote for Biden, and remind them the Democrats have not fought. They call them the fascists. They're really the racists. They're the old Dixiecrats. This has been a trend in American politics going back to slavery times. And it's actually declining. It's declining culturally. It's declining demographically. And they're old. They're dying out. So they should be nowhere near power. It's only because of voter suppression and the failure, I would say, the Democratic Party to really fight them on that. So there are a lot of issues at stake here. But I would say, you know, last point, the question is, how are we going to vote against Trump? And the strongest vote against Trump and Trumpism is a green vote. So if you suffered through Trump's speech, my empathy goes out to you, because it was hard to watch, you know, because the lies keep coming and you want to scream back at them. So anyway, I hope that was helpful for people thinking about this election, and have a good evening.